Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land that I'm streaming from. For me, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and any Aboriginal people joining us today. I also extend my respects to other Indigenous Australians joining us today and acknowledge that sovereignty in this country was never ceded, and this always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I always like to start off by saying the information I provide today is related to the Victorian foster care system, and so that might be slightly different in other states if you're joining us from elsewhere in Victoria or around the world. Um, but if you do have questions about foster caring in Victoria, you can always give us a call after the live stream today on the number beside me, I think in this direction, 1800 013 088. So, Fostering Connections is a Victorian statewide recruitment and attraction service for anyone interested in becoming a foster carer in Victoria. And we're calling on the community to open their hearts and homes to children and young people in need. Now more than ever, we need capable and confident foster carers to care for our children and young people who are vulnerable and unable to live with their family for a myriad of reasons. And we know that it takes a village to raise children, no matter who you are or where you come from. And so we call on Victorians to play their part in helping to be a part of that village. So I'll start by introducing myself. That's always a good spot to begin. My name's Jasmine, and I'm a foster care recruiter assessor in Victoria. I have worked for Fostering Connections for the last year and a half, and I've been a foster care assessor for coming up 6 years now. So I love what I do. I get to work with amazing members of our community who are interested in foster caring. And in that time, I guess you could say I've been asked almost every question there is about foster care and what's involved and what that might look like for different circumstances and situations. So if you do have questions, as I said, feel free to pop them in the chat. We've got a few more people joining us now. So that's the way that these live streams run, is if you do have questions, put them in the chat. I can answer them in real time. Otherwise, I've got a colleague on the other side of the screen who's happy to provide resources and links to different website links that we have as well. So as I said, Fostering Connections is a statewide recruitment service, and our role is to provide support and information to members of the community who are interested in foster caring. So you can visit our website, or you can or you can give us a call on our inquiry line. That's 1800 013 088, and have a chat through your personal circumstances and what foster care might look like for you. And if you are ready to get started with foster caring, I can put you in touch with a foster care provider in your region. So in Victoria, we have community service organisations and ACCOs, Aboriginal Community Controlled Organisations, who provide foster care in different regions. So it can be a bit tricky to figure out which foster care agency services your local area, but not to worry, I can look that up for you if you give us a call. Whether you're just at the start of that journey and just feeling out what foster care even is or might look like for your family, or you're ready to take that first step, it doesn't matter. You can give us a call or visit our website. So let's start right at the very beginning. What is foster care? Foster care is the temporary care of children and young people by qualified, trained, assessed members of our community who have gone through all of the prerequisite checks and the assessment process to really get an idea of whether fostering is right for them and be prepared for that process. And it's the care of children from 0 to 18 who are unable to live with family members or their parents for, as I said, a myriad of reasons. In most cases, when a child or young person first comes into foster care, the goal is to reunite that child with their parents, and so supports will be offered to that family to help support that reunification process as soon as it's safely possible to do so. And foster carers play a really key part in supporting that return to family and supporting children during that time when it might not be safe for them to live at home. So I can tell you there are approximately 11,000 children and young people in foster care in Victoria at any one time. In out-of-home care. And that includes kinship and residential care and different care types. But what we know is that for children and young people, living in a family home environment is always going to be better for their, is almost always going to be better for their experiences and their outcomes. And who wouldn't prefer to live in a home-based environment? So foster carers play a really integral role in making sure children stay connected to their communities, to their schools, to their family members, and to other people that they might know in their local area. So what we need is local carers for local kids. So if you're thinking I live in the middle of nowhere, or I live in the middle of a big city and there's probably plenty of foster carers around me, we definitely need more at this point in time. So, as I said, most children and young people will return to their family after about 6 months, is typical. Um, but not every child will return home. And so when that happens, that's what we would call long-term foster care. And that fits broadly into what we would call the four main types of care. So when you're expressing interest in becoming a foster carer, you can look at what your family and lifestyle looks like, how much time you have to give, your own children's needs, or if you're a single person without children, how you might take on that big caring responsibility. And you can choose between different types of care. So you can specify the ages of children and young people you'd like to care for, whether that's any age 0 to 18, whether it's under fives or primary school or high school. You get to make that choice. You can choose the number of children you can care for at any one time, and also the gender if that's important to you, if you've got other considerations in your home as well. And then you can choose the type of care. So oftentimes people think foster care is a really long-term, full-time commitment. And in some cases, that's absolutely true. We need carers who are able to commit to long-term care, sometimes until a child is 18. But there is also other types of care, including short-term care, which is usually up to 6 months while that reunification with parents is being made possible. There's also emergency care. So when a child comes into care and needs somewhere to stay immediately, usually for a few days up to a few weeks. And then there's respite care. And respite care is typically a weekend a month for the same child. Hopefully, you'd be building a relationship with that child or young person, but they might have a full-time carer that provides the day-to-day care most of the time. So as I said earlier, it takes a village to raise children, and most families will have aunties or uncles or friends or grandparents who can take those children and young people and give the parents a bit of a break. And so that's where our respite carers step in foster care to be able to provide a bit of a break for the child or the family that they're staying with. Sometimes families might have medical emergencies or other priorities or travel plans that they need to attend to. And so that's when our respite carers can be a big help as well. So if you're thinking, I can't commit to being a full-time carer because I don't have the time, or we're really busy, or I'm not able to commit to full-time caring for a child or young person, there are those other options of that emergency and respite care as well that you can sign up for. I've mentioned a couple of different family types, and something I hear a lot on our phone line, particularly at the moment, is a lot of people are calling up and saying, I'm single, I don't have children of my own, but I've always wanted to foster. Can I do it? Absolutely. Sometimes not having that parenting experience with your own children can actually be a huge benefit. And sometimes people forget that parenting your own child is always going to be different to caring for a child in foster care, because they come with different needs and challenges and cultural identities. And you also have a team around you who is supporting you to make decisions, unlike typical parents. So coming into foster care without parenting experience is absolutely fine. We will talk you through what that might look like for you. And if you do need to get some more experience before you get started, then that's what your foster care agency is there for. I've mentioned the foster care agencies a couple of times. I've mentioned that there's a training and assessment process, but what does it look like? When you call us up on our phone line at Fostering Connections, I'm here to answer any questions that you might have about foster care. And it certainly isn't taking up too much of my time, and there are no silly questions. We'd much rather ask and provide that information to you to help you make an informed decision from the get-go. But if you are ready to get started and see what fostering might look like for your family, we'll get you connected with a foster care agency. And there are lots of different agencies in Victoria who can support you when you are a foster carer, but we'll get you set up and connected to one agency in particular, and they'll run through that training and assessment process with you. It's the same training and assessment process wherever you are in Victoria, whether you're in Wangaratta or Wodonga or Warn Ponds or Benalla to Bendigo to Ballarat. It's the same process to becoming a foster carer no matter where you are. And what that process looks like is you'll have an initial phone call with an agency, what we call an inquiry conversation, and they'll go through some main screening questions with you. So that includes things like, are you over 21? Do you have a spare bedroom? And do you have the right to live in and work in Australia? So making sure you're a permanent resident or a visa holder. And in some cases, you can still become a foster carer even if you're not a permanent resident just yet, but that's on a case-by-case basis. Once that initial eligibility criteria has been met, you'll be sent some information to read through and learn more about foster care. And some of that information will be similar to what's on our website that Bronwyn's kindly just popped in the chat for you. That's fosteringconnections.com.au. And that includes all sorts of things like what the process looks like, what foster care involves, and what we look for from prospective carers. And as you read through that, your agency will set up a time to have what's called an information exchange session. And the idea for that is for the agency to get to know you a little bit better and for you to get to know the agency a bit better and understand a bit more about fostering. So it goes in that two-way information exchange format. After that, you'll be asked if you would like to proceed to an application. And as we ask if you'd like to proceed at every step so that as you're getting more information and as we're learning more about you, you can opt out at any time. So sometimes people don't know a lot about fostering when they first start, and it can be a lot to take on board, and that is okay. You're not locked in from that first phone call to signing up to caring for a child immediately. There's definitely a process involved where you can opt out at any time. But if you would like to proceed from there, you'll get an application form and be enrolled in some training. The training covers things like when a child first comes into care and what that process looks like. It looks at the families of children and young people that we care for and making sure that foster carers understand that the families of our children are not necessarily bad people, but sometimes they've just had some bad circumstances around them that mean that the child's unsafe. It looks at how to work within a team because, as I mentioned earlier, there's lots of workers involved in foster care and lots of decision making that's not necessarily entirely up to the foster carers. We look at things like what it looks like to let go and say goodbye at the end of a placement, which is a really common concern I hear from people looking at foster caring is, I'd love to do it, but I'm not sure how I would give the child back. And that's pretty understandable. We are asking our carers to open their hearts to our beautiful children and young people, but it can be hard to let go at the end. And so we do provide training around that and how to take care of yourself as well and make sure your mental well-being is in check because you can't be a great carer unless you're looking after yourself as well. Once you complete that training, then we'll send you out some paperwork. And this can be the part that's a little bit tricky for some people because, of course, there are lots of checks and information that we require from foster carers. So things like police checks, working with children checks, we'll ask for references and we'll ask you to write a life story so we understand who you are and what you've been through in your own life as well. Once all of that paperwork comes back, and unless there's any big red flags on your police check or working with children check that say you'd be ineligible, then you'll be set up with an assessor in your area. And that assessor will come out and visit your home, usually about 4 times. And they go through a series of conversations with you, looking at your competency in certain areas of caring. So again, your own life history and making sure that fostering isn't going to trigger you or bring up potentially negative emotions for you. We look at how you work with others and how you communicate, how you deal with stress, and making sure that you can cope with some of the ups and downs of foster caring, and looking at what your household situation looks like. So some people have, 5 kids who have lots of different activities that they're enrolled in, and other people are single professionals who might like a lot of downtime on the weekends. So we really want to make sure we're getting to know you and your family and your lifestyle before we register you as a carer so that we can do the best placement matching down the track. So if we have a young person with a lot of sensory needs, who needs a lot of downtime to regulate and decompress, then a house with 4 kids who are constantly in and out going to different sporting activities and lots of noise is not going to be the best environment for that young person. So we get to know you really, really well throughout that assessment process. And most carers that I've assessed in my career say that it's a really eye-opening experience, and it's something that they never would have thought that they would have the opportunity to go through. So it really looks at who you are as people, whether you're in a couple or a family or a single person, to understand who you are. And it's quite an interesting process, and one of the parts of my job that I love the absolute most. Once all of your assessments are done, we'll check your references and check in with your support network to make sure that you've got good supports around you. And then it will go to a panel to make that final decision about your registration. Once you're registered as a carer, there's a few more bits of paperwork to sign, just making sure you understand what's involved and what your agency is expecting of you and things like that. And then we will pretty much not too long after that, you'll start getting phone calls about taking placements. So if you have questions about that assessment process, please feel free to pop them in the chat, or any other questions relating to foster care, pop them in the chat and I'll answer them for you. But that's the assessment process in a nutshell. We say it takes between 6 and 9 months to go through that process, which can sound like a really long time, particularly for people who are wanting to help now. But I often liken it to, a pregnancy period where you really do need to adjust to how your lifestyle might change once you become a foster carer. So it gives you time to maybe set up the spare bedroom how you would like, talk to all your family and friends, really consider what the impacts of fostering might be on your time and your lifestyle, and all of those sorts of things to get your ducks in a row and make sure that you're not making an impulsive or emotional decision, because foster caring is quite an emotional area, I guess, and we want to make sure that you've really thought it through before you become a carer. I'm making it sound like it will all be incredibly full on and exhausting and really hard, and some of our carers do say that there's hard parts, but there's also fun parts and rewarding parts and life-changing parts that come along with fostering as well. So I often hear from carers that, the best parts of fostering are when a child starts to open up to you and trust you for the first time, when a child might have stayed with you for a little while and is finally engaging in school or other activities and they're making friends. Um, Sometimes it's when a child sleeps through the night or learns a new skill, and our carers say that that is the most rewarding experience that they have as foster carers. And so there are really beautiful parts of fostering that definitely outweigh some of the challenging aspects as well. Um, I don't see any questions coming through the chat, so I'm going to keep talking. But as I said, if you do have questions, pop them in the chat and I will definitely answer them. Another thing that comes up a lot in foster care, something I hear on our phone line a lot and when talking to agencies, is around the support that foster carers can are offered by their foster care agencies. And so I mentioned before, you'll be connected with a foster care agency and they'll go through that assessment process with you. But what happens after you're accredited? Do we just land a child in your home and say good luck and thank you? Absolutely not. There's plenty of support around foster carers in Victoria, and that ranges through all sorts of different things relating to what your family might need. So first and foremost, you'll have case management support. So your agency will have a caseworker assigned to each and every child, and you will get to know them incredibly well as a foster carer. They will work closely with you to make sure that you feel ready and confident to care for the child and young person in your home, and also act to support you in that day-to-day caring responsibilities. So they're the ones you'll ask for if you need help with schooling, or if there's particular behaviour that you're managing, or understanding more about a child's life history and family. That case manager can provide support to you with that. They can also help you access other allied supports as well. So if a child in your care might need speech pathology or medical support or education support, then you can talk to your agency about how to access those as well. You also have access to different support activities and events on a rotating calendar at most agencies, and that gives you a chance to meet other foster carers in your area. So again, going back to that pregnancy analogy, when you become a parent for the first time, often you're linked in with a new parents group or a mums group, and they're there to support you as people who know what you're going through and what your life looks like on a day-to-day basis. For foster care, you don't necessarily have a new parents group, but you will be linked in with other foster carers in your region. So, as I said, lots of social events, lots of support group activities, and different ways to keep carers connected at different agencies. And that can be a great way to meet other people who understand what foster care looks like and is and involves, and the types of support that you need as well, whether that's just a listening ear or babysitting occasionally or advice. Other foster carers are definitely your best resource. Your agency will also provide lots of training. And so, if there are areas that you would like to learn more about, things around trauma or development for children, or those tricky adolescent years, or cyber safety for children, all of those sorts of things, there is lots and lots of training available, as well as training available around caring for First Nations children as well. Holly, I can see your questions come through. I'll respond to that in just one moment. And then the other support that is available to you as foster carers is access to the Foster Care Association of Victoria, who provide training, advocacy, and counselling. They also have a carers assistance program where you can call up and have further support for foster care um, by an independent body. So that's the support that's available. And Holly, I can see you've asked a question there around supporting children with disabilities. Let me just have a little look at that question. Holly, that's a really good question around fostering a child with disabilities. How does their NDIS plan? Would it be the case that the worker or support coordinator deal with organising supports and paying invoices? I'm self-managed for my child's plan, and I was wondering how it would work for a foster child. That is a great question, and does depend on a case by case basis. So it's a unique question and it's a unique answer in that I can't tell you 100% what that would look like in every case. But you do have that case manager that can support you with the different nuances of caring at all. And so with things like working with the child's plan, and I have to admit, sorry, Holly, I don't know a lot about NDIS planning other than it's an incredible burden to be placed on parents and carers. Um, you do have that support from the agency. So I can't tell you exactly how it works individually for each child, but what I can tell you is you can ask for support and support is available. And many of our children in foster care will have some form of disability, whether they're on an NDIS plan or not. And you can ask for what you need as a foster carer as well. So if it's support with that NDIS planning process, you can say, I can take this child on if I can have that additional support, because I can imagine it would be incredibly challenging to be self-managed for your child's plan and another child's plan as well. I hope that answers your question, and do feel free to give us a call on the inquiry line if I can provide a bit more advice for your personal circumstances. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. Even if they are unique questions, I will try my best to answer them. Okay, so we've covered off what becoming a foster carer looks like. We've talked about the types of care. We've talked about the support that foster care agencies can provide. I want to go through a couple of the myths that I often hear in fostering, things that come up on the phone line, and things that are really common experiences or thoughts that people have before they become a foster carer. And so let's start with probably the one that's on everyone's mind the most, and that is, how does it work to have a job and work around foster care? So many foster carers will work full time. It's becoming more and more common that even two partner households will have both partners working full time. But you can be a foster carer if you work full time, part time, if you work from home, if you own your own business, or if you are not working currently as well. What's important to note around foster caring is that we will ask you what your lifestyle looks like. So, as I said earlier, different children will have different requirements. Excuse me. Sorry, different needs. And so, for some children, they might need a full-time stay-at-home carer. Um, that's really typical for babies and children under 5 who might need a more hands-on caregiver. But certainly if you work full-time and you're open to different care types at all, you can apply to be a foster carer. So if you need help with things like after school care or transport or things like that, your agency will talk to you about what it will look like for you and whether it's feasible. But for most people, you can absolutely work and be a foster carer. Where it becomes a bit of a conversation or something that we would explore more with you is similar to any child in your care. If you would, sorry, Holly, I see your question and I am coming up to that one in a moment. If you work full time, if you had your own children and they were sick or needed to be picked up from school for some reason, would you be able to leave work to attend to that? And that's the basic expectation of foster carers. If you're someone who works in a really high demand job and you're not able to leave work at a moment's notice, then that might get a bit tricky to do full-time care. If you had someone in your support network that could help you out in that instance, so you had mum who lived close by, or you had, you were a two-partner family, or if you were just wanting to care on the weekends or in the holidays when you've got time off, then you can also do that as well. So you can absolutely work full-time if you're caring. Sorry, care if you work full-time. Holly, are there ethical issues that come up with non-First Nations people fostering First Nations kids? Are you put in touch with First Nations communities to support the children? Fabulous, fabulous question, Holly. And we need people like you who are asking those questions. So that's really great to hear. Okay, so that opens up a bit of a broader conversation, and that is to say that in Victoria, the care of Aboriginal children is being transitioned to ACOs for self-determination. So it's really important that First Nations kids remain connected to community and their kin, and that's particularly important for our First Nations kids. So, when you take on the care of an Aboriginal child, first and foremost, as part of your assessment process, every foster carer in Victoria will be assessed on their cultural knowledge and understanding. So, that doesn't mean you have to be an expert in First Nations history, but it does mean that you do need to have an understanding of some of that cultural context around caring for First Nations kids. Once you're registered as a carer, around 30 or 40% of children and young people in care in Victoria are First Nations, and unfortunately, we don't have enough First Nations foster carers who are able to provide foster care for those kids. So, what happens first and foremost when an Aboriginal child is unable to live with their family? First, we look for other Aboriginal family members. If that's not possible, we look for other family members who are non-Indigenous. If that's not possible, we look for Aboriginal caregivers, foster carers. If that's not possible, we look for non-First Nations carers. And those carers do specific training and work within a specific cultural plan for children and young people from an Aboriginal background. And you will 100% be put in touch with First Nations communities, organisations and resources within your local area as well. That sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like, taking on an extra load. Not the case. That is what your case managers are there for, to support you with, and making sure that if you're not sure how to keep that child connected with community, that they're there to act on your behalf and help you out with that. They might attend community events with you. They might encourage you with different books and resources that you can access, things like that, that will definitely set you up for success in keeping those children connected to community. But it is absolutely there are ethical considerations, and we know that it's not always possible for children and young people from an Aboriginal background to stay with Aboriginal carers, even if that is the best possible outcome for them. So Bronwyn's popped in a really great resource into the chat for you with a link to our website there on caring for Aboriginal children. And if that's something that you're specifically interested in, Holly, I'd really encourage you to look at your local ACCOs who provide foster care, and they will be caring specifically for First Nations kids, and they will support you with any of the ethical considerations around caring for First Nations kids when you're not First Nations yourself. If you're not First Nations yourself, sorry, I should say. Keep hitting me with the questions, Holly. You're asking me some big ones. It's keeping me on my toes. So some other sort of frequently asked things that come up on our phone line, or things that people ask about, is around family contact. As I mentioned at the top of this session, we absolutely need for our kids to stay connected to family. And in Victoria, the goal of foster care is almost always reunification where it's safe to do so. So we want our kids to stay connected with their families while they're in care. And with the goal of them being able to eventually live back with family, whether that's parents or other family members. So what does that look like for foster carers to keep kids connected to family in foster care? It can sound like you're taking on quite a big and challenging experience, I guess. And I think that's pretty reasonable. You have your own family's safety and well-being to consider as well. And that is not to say that all families are a risk to your safety and well-being, but it is okay to want privacy within your home as well. So when it comes to supporting children and young people with staying connected with their families, what it looks like is setting them up for success for family contact days. So letting them know in advance when family contact is going to happen, supporting them with things like maybe drawing pictures or making crafts for mum and dad that they can take with them, providing snacks in their bag, and making sure that they don't have to worry about other things other than, connecting with their parents or family members, and providing a space for them to talk after contact if they want to, because that can be bring up a lot of complex emotions for our kids as well. You don't necessarily need to come into contact with the family of children and young people in your care, but you might have something like a communications book that you can share with the family, or you might send photos or letters about how that child is doing to family contact with the child. That can help to manage, to maintain the child's life history as well, and make sure that there aren't any gaps in that knowledge that the family holds. If we think about, our biggest memories from childhood and where that comes from, oftentimes it comes from sitting around the table with maybe grandma and granddad and all your siblings and your parents swapping stories about that funny time that something happened, and you reminisce in that way. So it can be great to fill in those gaps of, when first steps are taken, or how a young person is doing at school, or what they're interested in, so that that's not lost from their life history while they're in foster care. Um, Oftentimes, people are worried about behavioural challenges with children and young people in care. People say to me a lot, I wish I could foster, but it just seems really hard. The children are really badly behaved. And that's totally fine. Sorry, that's not totally fine. Holly, that's fine for you to have another question. I'll just come back to this one first. Children and young people have absolutely faced challenges, but they're just like other children as well. So it's really important that you approach fostering with an open heart and a willingness to try to understand their needs. And as a foster carer, what we expect from you is that you are able to show them support and boundaries and safety, and help guide them through those different change stages and challenges with persistent and consistent care. So while sometimes there might be behavioural responses to trauma, it's about having that consistency and stability from from carers as well. Okay, Holly, throwing me some curveballs today. Okay. Holly, that is a really fantastic question. It is complicated, and it is also still relatively uncommon, although not unheard of. Um, Holly, I'm really having to think about the right way to answer these questions. Um, okay, so for anybody watching along, the question is, if there's a gender diverse or trans child whose family doesn't support this, however, it's supported in a foster family, how would this be dealt with? Would the foster family have to abide by the biological family's rules around gender identity? Let's go right back to the very beginning where I talked about that assessment process. And what I will say to kick things off is that to become a foster carer, you need to be able to support a child's identity presentation, whether that is a cultural identity, whether they come from a culture that's different to your own, or whether they present with a different gender or sexual identity different to what they were born with. So, our foster carers receive a lot of training around this, around how to support a child who may be exploring their gender identity, who might be expressing that they are trans. And there is an expectation of Victorian foster carers that you will support a child's identity expression. You're right, Holly, that there are often times where foster families have to abide by biological families. I don't want to say rules, but I guess backgrounds and information that's provided by the biological family, but that would be relating to things like allergies. It would depend on things like religious beliefs, but it would also depend on how involved the parents are. So sometimes parents may not be involved in that child's care at all. They may not be having family contact. And I will say, I do know of one young person who was in foster care for this very reason, and the biological parents were a bit hands off. And so they weren't really involved in what the foster family were doing day to day. But it would be a conversation around the child's identity and the safety around that child's identity. So we don't want to be doing harm to children in foster care by abiding by those wishes, but we certainly would be making sure that those voices are being taken into account. But overall, what's necessary for people to take away from this session today, after all that rambling, is that if you become a foster carer, we talk a lot about maintaining and supporting a child's identity to thrive, whether that's cultural identity, sexual or gender identity, or just who they are as people. If little Timmy comes to you and he's really interested in footy and you won't let him kick a ball, then I dare say, probably not a suitable foster carer. So I hope that answers the question, Holly. It is definitely a curveball, and I know it's a complicated question. Um, but you're really keeping me on my toes in this session, so I do appreciate that as well. Um, Holly, I've just seen your next comment, that they're just ethical concerns that come up for me around fostering. Um, Holly, we need people like you. We need people who understand that this is not foster care is not always immediately the best option for children and young people. And I dare say that wherever possible for children to stay living with their own family in their own communities, we would that would always be the number one option. So we need foster carers who understand that there are definitely ethical considerations in fostering, and that it's not always a case of they're better off living with you than elsewhere. So if foster care is something that you're interested in, these are really, really great questions that you're asking, and ones that will be explored really, really thoroughly through your assessment. So rest assured, even if you're not interested in fostering right now, there's certainly questions that I hope you know we ask them of foster carers, and we make sure that foster carers are making these considerations before they're registered as well. People often think that they've got a working with children check and a police check, and so they're ready to become foster carers. We do explore a lot of different concepts and a lot of different ideas with carers before you become registered, so that a First Nations child isn't placed with you without having first had those conversations and exploring some of those concerns, and so that a child exploring their gender identity isn't placed with you before you've unpacked how you might manage or deal with that situation. So that's why the process can take the time that it takes, but it's really great that you're asking these questions, so thank you. I'm not sure if I want to challenge you to adding any more in the chat, but feel free to. And as I said earlier, feel free to give us a call on 1800 013 088 as well. Another question I'm often asked on our phone line is, what information will I get about a child before I take the placement? So we obviously don't register you as a carer and then knock on your door with a child or young person and say, here you go, ready to care for them. You will receive a call from the initial placements team at your agency, and for some agencies that might be within the same team that did your assessment. For others there might be a handover, but they will be people who will know a lot about you and what your family can offer. And so when that call is made, it might be as simple as, we've got a young person who needs somewhere to go immediately. They're a 5-year-old boy, their name is Tom. Can you care for them? And you could say yes or no at that instance, or you can ask for more information. And that more information will be things that will help you to prepare for that placement and understand if it's the right fit for you. So it might include things like their medical needs, their routines, their behavioural needs, their placement history if they've been in foster care before, and it might include the reason for that current placement. So what's going on in that family's home that they're not safe. You can ask for other details, so there might be information in there about the child's family or contact arrangements or cultural identity. So if they're a First Nations child or from a different cultural background to Australian, you'll receive some information about that as well. You can ask for information as and if you need it. So if there is a child or young person that you think you might be willing to take on, you can ask for more information and you can ask any questions at that point that you need. So where do they go to school? Do they have allergies? What do they like? What don't they like? What's their routine like? Things like that. And sometimes that process can happen really quickly. As you can imagine in foster care, sometimes we do need a really timely response from carers, particularly with emergency care. But for long-term care, often there'll be a bit of a transition period. So you'll have time to think and set up the home before taking on that long-term commitment. But as I said, you can ask for that information. It's also really important to note that you can say no if a particular placement isn't going to suit you at any time. Sometimes you might have additional work commitments, or you might have family coming to town and no spare bedroom, or after a long placement, you might need to have a break for your own family to take the time to reconnect or get a few things done off the to-do list that might have slipped away. So that is all okay as well, and that's all things that you can talk to your agency about. And as I said, you can choose things like the age of child in your care or the gender or the number of children and whether you're able to care for siblings. So obviously we would 100% prefer for siblings to stay together in foster care. Children have the best outcomes when they stay connected to family, and that can be the easiest way to keep them connected to where they're from, is keeping them with their siblings. We don't want to separate siblings in care if we can avoid it. But unfortunately, these days, a lot of people only have capacity to care for one additional child or only have one spare bed that they can offer to foster caring. And so that's sometimes not always the case that siblings can stay together. We would prefer it though. So if you are interested in caring for siblings, please definitely reach out, because we have a desperate need for carers of sibling groups at the moment as well. Holly, I see you're typing away at one more question. And what we might do is I'll answer that one, Holly, unless it's too much of a curveball. And then we might wrap this one up for today. Still typing. Oh, here we go. If you have siblings, can they share a bedroom or is there only one bedroom? Again, Holly, case by case, but this one is a much easier question for me to answer. In some cases, it might not be appropriate for siblings to share a bedroom. For a number of different reasons, it might not be appropriate. But where it is appropriate, if you have one spare bedroom, oftentimes our foster carers will set them up with, say, one single bed and maybe a trundle bed or bunk beds in a room. Occasionally they might set up 2 beds available for a room depending on the placement, and that's perfectly fine. For some families they might have a spare bedroom that has a queen bed set up for when family are in town and visiting, and that's the bedroom that they'll use for fostering. So it's just important to chat to your agency about what the needs of those siblings would be. So, Holly, if I called you up and said, Holly, can you take Tim and Tom, and they are 6 and 8, you can ask if they are able to share a bedroom. Um, in other cases, there might be siblings where it's not appropriate for them to share a bedroom for, again, a number of reasons. And your agency will talk to you about what that needs to look like in your household. But absolutely, it's not a non-negotiable that they have to have one bedroom per child, but it is very important in Victoria that you must have one spare bedroom for children in foster care so that they've got that privacy and a space that feels like their own. We all know how important that is um, to to all of us. So making sure you've got one spare bedroom, whether you put a couple of beds in there or not, is dependent on your family situation. Um, but yes, in some cases, siblings can share bedrooms. Okay, well, Holly has kept me on my toes today, so we really appreciate that, Holly, and I hope that you will give us a call on our phone line if and when you're ready to get started in your fostering journey. But I am going to wrap things up for, excuse me, I'm going to wrap things up there. Um, I'm going to wrap things up there, and we'll see you again at our next Becoming a Foster Carer in Victoria live stream. In the meantime, if you have more questions, feel free to jump on our website and look at some of our blogs and stories from our amazing Victorian foster carers. We do save these live streams if you'd like to share them with anybody later. If there are things that you'd like to come back to and listen to again, they'll be on our page. And we also have old previous live streams saved as well if you'd like more information. Or if you'd like to have a chat with me or somebody on the phone line, please give us a call at 1-800-013-088. Thanks so much.